Hello and welcome to Favorite Rugby on Favorite Sports. For today's URC quarterfinals, 5 things learned. One of my favorite videos to do, and it's always an interesting one to sort of see what different people take out of the different sort of the weekend's action. You know, things that I might have noticed that other people wouldn't have noticed, or opinions I might have formed that other people might have formed different ones. So it's a fun thing to do. Now, it was an interesting weekend of quarterfinals. We saw 2 upsets in Munster and Connacht. We saw 2 pretty impressive and dominant performances from the likes of the Stormers and Leinster. And so now we're just going to tell you my sort of 5 main takeaways from the quarterfinals, which are obviously going to be different to yours. So I want to know if you agree, if you disagree, or where you sort of stand with what I think down in the comments below. And let me know what your takeaways were. You can list them 1 to 5. You can give me just some extra ones. I want to know what your thoughts are. Before we look at exactly what my 5 takeaways are, please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Without further ado, let's go to number 1. Right, a very impressive performance from Connacht against Ulster in a game which wasn't maybe the best sort of skill set being displayed. Quite a few knockouts, a couple of rookie errors, but it was a genuine playoff game, you know, and almost a test match feel to it in terms of 2 teams and almost sort of afraid to blink, you know, really sort of battering it up, keeping it very tight, looking to try and sort of physically, you know, outlast the other ones. But for me, what was impressive is that when it gets to sort of playoff games, certain teams have got that sort of fight in it, that sort of ability to just not lie down, the ability to find, you know, ways of getting the job done. And I thought that Connacht had that this weekend. You know, I thought that, you know, despite, you know, Ulster almost made a really good comeback, and it was a 5-point, you know, difference. But to be able to go away, you know, against a team which finished second in the competition and be able to physically, I thought they physically dominated them, and be able to hold on and to really give them a go throughout the entire 80 minutes. And a bit of everything, you know, they had to score points, and the Ulster discipline wasn't great, but it was because of the amount of pressure that Connacht enforced on them. And they just sort of, you know, just kept the momentum the entire game. So I do think they're going to, it's a very different prospect to try and beat the Stormers in Cape Town. But I'll tell you what, they're a side that just have that fight in them, and sides that have that are ones that can often, you know, cause a couple of upsets. And I'd be surprised if they do go all the way, but I do think that, you know, they'll be buzzing with confidence, and maybe they are sort of slight dark horses going into the final 2 rounds. So a week ago, on the fan forum, we spoke about the Stormers, and we said the fact that the Stormers have been brilliant this season. They really have. But in the last couple of weeks, they have been a bit off, you know, since that EPCR game, that quarterfinal, that they haven't been at their best, which I think is fair. You know, they just weren't looking like the Stormers we saw, you know, earlier this year, last year, who just looked like no team were going to be able to beat them, especially at home. But on Saturday, it was a pretty clinical performance, and the Bulls scoring right at the end there to score 33 points to 14 would have been a much better scoreline to sort of really describe the game. But this is sort of the time you want to be playing some of your best rugby. And the nice thing about Stormers is that if they win this weekend, they'll then have a 2-week break before they'll probably have to go over to Dublin and play against Leinster. But they can go over nice and early, get themselves acclimatized. But they can also sort of rest a bit, and they can spend 2 weeks just planning on trying to beat Leinster. Whereas Leinster, for example, if they were to win this weekend, they've got a match next weekend. They've got the Champions Cup final, a huge victory. So in many ways, you know, I think that the Stormers, if they can get past Connacht this weekend, I wouldn't say they were going as favourites, but I'll tell you what, they certainly have a lot of things going their way as they go into that final. Right, so some teams have progressed this season, some teams taken steps back. The Bulls have definitely taken a step back. A year ago, they went over and they beat Leinster in Dublin, and went down to Cape Town to play a final for the URC. They've now gone out in the URC quarterfinals against Stormers, who are the reigning championship. So on paper, you'll sit there going, oh well, it's not, you know, massively surprising to lose to the current champions, you know, in the quarterfinals. But first of all, the fact that they're playing against them, you know, I think the Bulls probably should have finished further up the log. They've got themselves a home playoff. I think that's always very important. But I think the biggest thing is that I think, you know, we saw a poll yesterday, I think it was put out on Twitter, and they were talking about who had the best squad post-COVID. And I said the Bulls had the best squad. And I think, you know, when we went through the first season of URC, I still think that the Bulls had the best and most balanced squad. we're now sort of 2 seasons later, and I don't think the Bulls will finish this season. They look at their squad and actually have more questions about their squad than they really have answered. I don't think they've had too many young players who have come through and really put their hands up and said, you don't need to worry about the position. We've got it covered. Whereas I do think they've got quite a lot of experienced players who maybe are sort of the performance level is slightly dropping. And I think that they've got to do a lot of recruitment. Jake White's talking about a whole rebuild job, and I think he's very right. So I think that, it's been a disappointing end to the season for them. It's been a disappointing season. But more worryingly is it's not a case of, the results didn't go their way, but they've built quite a good squad and they're building nice continuity, because I don't think that is the case. I think they are sitting there looking at their squad going, this is not where we want it to be. We're going to have to do a lot of work to it, which is a tricky position to be in as we go into the off season. Arguably the most disappointing team in the URC, and definitely probably the most disappointing team in South Africa, was the Sharks. And they will now be playing in the Challenge Cup next season next to the Lions. They got to the quarterfinals, but only just finished 8th. And you look at the squad, and I always say, take away the Springboks. You still look at the squad, and they've got a Francois Fent, a Ben Tapuai, a Vincent Suka, a Carly Sardi. Grant Williams barely plays for Bucks, but he's still an option there. Ryan Jansen van Rensburg, Bernard Cox, top player. You look at Sikinbozi Noche. They've got Dylan Richardson. They've got so many good players over and above just their Springboks that they really should have had a much better season. So for them to finish without Champions Cup rugby, to go out in the quarterfinals where they went out in a whimper, they didn't even compete in the quarterfinal, is a disaster. And John Plumtree's got a big job to do. To think that with Sharks, all the resources they have, to only finish 3 points ahead of the Lions, kind of sort of shows you. I mean, the Lions, people talking about the Lions having a bad season, and yet with half the resources, have gotten 3 points away from the Sharks, won the same amount of games. The Sharks one draw, that's the difference between them. It's very, very disappointing campaign for the Sharks, and it's difficult to sort of see exactly how they can improve, because the squad, for example, is very good on paper. So is it just a coaching issue? Is it a systems issue? Where are the issues, and how do you fix them? That is something they have to try and identify and start making some big news if they are to start fulfilling their potential, which I think is to be a top team in Europe, let alone just in the URC. Too good. Swept the Sharks away. I think we're playing against a slightly weaker Munster side this weekend because a lot of HIAs for Munster, and the Leinster side that played against the Sharks, despite being slightly weaker, looked as good as any Leinster side. I think they've got the depth. I think they've got the players. I think they've got the game plan. And I think that if any team besides them were to win the URC, it would be considered an upset, or would be considered, the non-favourites winning it. Leinster just do look, for me, the best side in the world at the moment from a club perspective. We'd love to go still see them take on the Crusaders and that kind of thing. But, in the European specific and the URC, I don't see any team which is better than them, which have better systems, players, coaches, the entire sort of product. And it's theirs to lose. They lost it last year. Will they lose it this year? We'll have to wait and see. But those were my takeaways. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please do smash like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steven, and I'll chat to you soon.